So, welcome everybody, and as you may know, this is the little Bangkok Sangha, and it's got a couple of unique characteristics. The first one is that everything's done in English, which for an Englishman, that's great. And the second, I need a microphone, sorry. Can you hear? That's better. Okay, can you hear now? Okay. So the second unique quality of Little Bangkok Sangha is that it's completely non-sectarian, by which I mean there are people speaking about different aspects of Buddhism. Mostly it's about Thai Buddhism, Theravadan Buddhism, but we have speakers from Japan who give talks on Zen Buddhism, and I follow Tibetan Buddhism. And for those of you who are not familiar with these distinctions, I always try and explain it like this. If you think of Buddhism as a mountain, there's many ways to get to the top of the mountain, but it's the same mountain. So the Theravadan way is very deliberate, and people take a long time to achieve a lot. Then there's Mahayana Buddhism, which is characterized by people who practice Buddhism in South Korea, China, and Japan. And this is really about trying to become what's known as a bodhisattva. In other words, living your life for the benefit of others with the ultimate goal of attaining Buddhahood, as all Tibetan Buddhist traditions are. And the Tibetan Buddhist tradition is sometimes referred to as Vajrayana, which basically takes a more direct path. Vajrayana comes from the perspective that all of us are already Buddha, but we can't see it, we don't know it, because of our own obscurations, negative karma, and ignorance, basically. And so these are different approaches to the same thing. These three branches of Buddhism didn't happen by accident. Buddha's first teaching was in Varanasi. First public teaching was the Four Noble Truths. And when he gave his teaching, he gave it over a period of days. And the first teaching is done from a Theravadan perspective. The second one from a Mahayana perspective. And the last one he did was from the Vajrayana perspective. So they're all talking about the same thing from a different perspectives. And these perspectives are important because all of us have different spans of awareness. Different things resonate to us. My elder brother is a kind of spiritual skeptic, and he's always asking me, what the hell is this Buddhism stuff all about? And what I do, I refer him to the Russian author Leo Tolstoy. He wrote a book of short stories, amongst other things, called What Men Live For. And one of the short stories about a king who had everything, handsome, nice wife, children, lots of money, good health. So what's the problem? There were three questions that were bugging him, that he needed an answer. No one could really give an answer. And so he decided to wander off into the back of beyond to find the answer to these three questions. And the first question, maybe you know the answer to. The first question was, what is the most important time of my life? Would anyone like to suggest an answer to that? No. Exactly right. And they get more difficult. And the second question is, who is the most important person in my life? Any ideas about this? It's not me, it's not yourself. Kind of. Well, Tolstoy explains it by saying that the most important person in everybody's life is that person that you are interfacing with at any moment. So we're going to ask another question. So knowing these two things, assuming we all want to be happy, what is the answer to this question? So the final question he asked was, okay, so what should I do with my life? What's the most important thing I should do with my life? I know now is important, that the people you interface with are very important. Well, it's very simple but very profound. You have to be kind to that person that you interact with. And it's okay being kind with people you know and love. More challenging where people are not as agreeable. But they're the people you'll learn the most from. Tolstoy was, he did practice Buddhism amongst writing all these books and things. So, can I assume that all of you at some point have actually done meditation? Has anybody never done a meditation? Okay, that's fine. So, before I talk about this subject tonight called Tong Leng, which means giving and receiving, we'll do a short mind-calming meditation. I should say that obviously I'm not a monk. I am not the message, I am the messenger. And I've been fortunate to being exposed to Tibetan Buddhism, if that's the right way of saying it, for about 40 years. And during that period I've met some very astounding teachers who've been able to pass on very important things to me. So before we start the meditation, the important thing to do, to remember, is that there are many, many kinds of meditations. But whichever kind of meditation one does, it's useful to adopt the appropriate posture. And from a traditional point of view, there are 7 things to bear in mind. If we're on the floor, I'll come to people in chairs in a minute. If you're on the floor, we cross our legs and we do something useful with our hands on our thighs or our lap. And then the third thing is we make sure that our shoulders are open rather than closed. Then we have to make sure that our back is upright, not stiff but curved. And then we should lower our chin slightly into our chest. And then we gently place our tongue on the roof of our mouth. And this prevents saliva coming out of the mouth during long meditations. And in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, at least, what one does is meditate with your eyes open. You don't have to, it's not compulsory. But if you do that, you should visualize 4 finger widths, and you park your vision there and just rest it there. And so meditation really is it's not a verb. You don't do meditation. You just meditate. And my main teacher, Rinpoche Rinpoche, explains it like this. He says the most important thing is to relax. So the people on chairs, it's better if you don't lean on the back of the chair, but if you have health issues, carry on. You plant your feet firmly on the ground, do something useful with your hands and the shoulders and all the other things I've suggested happens. So we'll do a short, few minute mind calming meditation. And this one, like many, is based on following the breath. This is useful because we don't have a choice. If we don't breathe, we're dead. So it's something that we're all quite good at. But with this kind of meditation, we have to increase our awareness of things we take for granted. And we do this by breathing gently, first through the nose, and as it enters our body, we're aware of breath coming into our body, and then it circulates around our body, and we gradually breathe out. Because we are naturally always full of thoughts, our mind is just running with thoughts all the time, what you must not do is trying to get rid of them. Instead, just let them manifest. And if you do this long enough, you'll find that an interesting thing happens, is that as each thought rises, if you investigate where is that thought coming from, what is the substance of that thought, you'll see it's like bubbles, they burst. And when a lot of thoughts burst, an interesting thing happens. You get spaciousness. But you have to be skillful. If you say, I'm going to burst all these bubble thoughts, it doesn't work. You just got to let it happen. So we'll do that. After we do this for a few minutes, I will say a few words of dedication, because meditation should not be seen as a drugless trip. We're doing it for ourselves so that we can be useful to other people. That's the idea. So let's try this just for a few minutes before we start. So first I will recite the 5 reflections. This is one of the prayers which has come directly from the Buddha, obviously not in English, but through various translations, that it can be pretty much sure that he did actually say this. And he recommended that you should say this after meditation. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, shall become otherwise separated from us. I am the owner of my karma, born of my karma, rest abide in my karma. Whatever karma I shall be, of that I will be the heir. And now the dedication. May all beings be happy and understand the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the highest bliss, which is free from suffering. And may they rest in the great equanimity, which is free of attachment and aversion. Okay, so now I will try and explain Tong Leng. I did give a talk last year with the same title. Was anybody at this talk last year? Okay, I'm sorry, Tom, you're going to have some repetition here, but it's not completely repetition. Okay. So I was taught this method by a very skillful Tibetan Lama called Trangu Rinpoche. Alas, he died a few years ago. And I was running a Dharma centre in Glasgow, Scotland for a few years on behalf of the Samueling Monastery with Akon Rinpoche as the abbot. And we were lucky. He had some mix-up with his flights, and so he had to spend an extra day in Glasgow. So I asked him if he'd come to the centre, and he said, what do you want me to talk about? And I said, Tong Leng. He said, okay. So he gave us a Tong Leng teaching. I like Tong Leng. I knew about Tong Leng before I met Trangu Rinpoche, because it's one of these practices that you don't have to know Sanskrit, Tibetan, or complicated mantras. It's very direct and very transformative. So this is a skillful form of meditation that allows us to cut through our own habitual tendency of closing down both our hearts and our minds to pain and suffering. So it's very useful. I've been in Thailand on this trip for about 6 weeks, having all kinds of dental work carried out, 3 root canals, etc., etc. And although they give you anesthetics, which is great, you still can smell your bones burning as the drills goes in. You still hear high screeching drills and all manner of things. And I had 5 2-hour sessions, you know. So this practice actually helped me in a dentist chair, because what it helped me do is to look at the discomfort from a different perspective. So this doesn't change anything, but what it does, it makes you look at things differently. So when they were drilling, I was able to transform the sound into light. So it was rather like watching a firework display and stuff like that. So how did this work? So this applies equally to our own pain and suffering, as well as to the pain and suffering of others. So instead of trying to block pain, it's embraced and transformed into loving kindness, which helps us cultivate our own relative bodhicitta. Tong Leng achieves this by using suffering to crush our own ego, which potentially enables us to release our true Buddha nature. There are 4 types of Tong Leng practice. Self-Tong Leng, where one imagines, because we are in a human samsaric condition, all of us either have or are having different kinds of suffering. It could be a physical thing, it could be a mental thing, it could be all kinds of things. And so, before we use Tong Leng to help other people, the normal procedure is to give ourselves Tong Leng, so we're in a better position to help others. The second type of Tong Leng is for our friends and families. And one of the most powerful forms of Tong Leng is to do it visualizing our enemies or people who don't like us and who would even wish us harm. This is the most beneficial kind, because the greater the negativity, the greater the potential of positivity can exist. And Tong Leng is also useful to help people as they die. I remember a decade or so ago, my father died. He was quite an elderly man, and he was in an intensive care unit somewhere in the UK. I was traveling around the world somewhere. And he was all kinds of tubes plugged in him and this kind of monitoring and what have you. And my mother was by his side, and she felt pretty helpless in that situation. So I emailed my teacher. I said, what can we do to make this, he's going to die, but to make this transition more manageable. He said, well, the first thing to do is you've got to speak to the clinicians and get them to, the diagnosis, he was going to die. It's just a question, is he going to die today or tomorrow? Is to disconnect all the stuff that's going in his body. And they didn't want to do this to start with, but eventually I said, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you to do it. They did it. And then something interesting happened. When all this stuff was disconnected from him, I gave my mother some instruction about Tong Leng, very basic stuff. And as she was doing it, he suddenly opened his eyes, smiled, squeezed the hand of my mother, and peacefully passed, which was a better outcome than a couple of days in a traumatic situation in an intensive care unit. That's a rather extreme suggestion. So it's a very powerful practice that requires guidance either from accomplished practitioners or from practitioners who have had comprehensive instruction from people who are realized practitioners. I've had it from Trungpa Rinpoche and also from Ringu Tulku Rinpoche. Before we do Tong Leng, we must always be preceded by heartfelt motivation, the wish to help oneself and others. And then the actual practice is concluded by dedication prayers. Our motivation comes from the understanding that all of us want the same thing, to be free from pain and suffering and to be happy. It is our own ignorance and ego which is the cause of our suffering. And in order to fully engage with an appropriate motivation, our minds must be inclusive, loving, and joyous. Tong Leng has the potential to destroy the harmful aspects of our ego and at the same time reveal our true Buddha nature. This means, counterintuitively, that the greater the pain we can take on, the greater the benefit for all. So let me explain very brief instructions about self-Tong Leng. So after we've done a short 10-minute mind-calming meditation, we recall the times of difficulty that either we are experiencing now or that we've experienced in the past, be it physical pain, emotional pain, or whatever kind of discomfort it is. We focus on our pain and suffering, but visualize them all cumulatively outside our body in the form of a ball of thick black smoke. So we recall the pain and suffering that we personally have had, but we externalize it and see it represented by a ball of thick black smoke. We then deliberately inhale this black smoke that we all visualized. And as we do so, the idea is the smoke enters our physical body and attacks our ego. Our ego is, in this practice, is represented as a egg-shaped entity with a thin membrane, and the idea is that the hot black smoke cracks the shell, which reveals our own Buddha nature. And this is why the more difficult experiences we can recall, the more of our Buddha nature has the potential to be revealed. And as the shell of an ego is breached, powerful, luminous white light radiates in all directions. This white light has the qualities of moonlight and reaches out to all sentient beings with the power to heal both pain and suffering of others. We then rest in this luminosity and dedicate the merit before we conclude the meditation. So before I move on, let's just try that as a brief introduction. So we're all in a meditation, relaxed situation. We were going to recall things we don't want to recall. It could be something someone has said to you, it could be physical pain, it could be emotional pain, it doesn't matter. Dig up the worst, but that will have the most benefit. And then concentrate these negative thoughts outside your body in a ball of hot black smoke, and we breathe it in. And as we breathe it in, it directly attacks our ego, and then white light radiates compassion in all directions. So let's try that for a couple of minutes. Okay. This is why it's called the Vajrayana tradition, because from the Vajrayana perspective of Buddhism, we are all perfect Buddhas. But our Buddhahood has been obscured by our negative karma and our negative obscurations, principally guarded by our ego. So we have to destroy the ego to reveal our true nature. So you don't have to be on a cushion to do this. you can be on the subway or driving your car with your eyes open, hopefully. And if you see road rage or inappropriate behavior by people around you, instead of judging and just increasing negativity, when people are angry, they're actually suffering quite a lot. And so you can, no words need be spoken, but you can absorb their negativity and transform it into something else. I found some notes that was made by Trungpa Rinpoche explaining that Tong Leng is more than it seems. So these are not my words, they're his words. He says, as one breathes out, imagine that with the exhalation, out goes all of one's happiness and all of the good karma one has in the form of lights. I mean, in the samsaric world, we don't normally do this. Some people do, but not most people don't. So we have to train ourselves to do that. It says these lights go to all beings to touch them so that they will obtain temporary happiness and cause for the ultimate happiness of Buddhism. With the inhalation, one imagines all the suffering, the causes of suffering, that bad karmas, that beings are drawn into oneself, and the incoming breath in the form of black rays. These black rays enter and merge into oneself, so one thinks that one has taken on the suffering of all beings. Thus this sending and taking meditation, giving away happiness and taking suffering with one breath. In doing this meditation, one changes the attitude of seeing oneself as more important than other beings. One will consider, will come to consider as more important than oneself. I mean, I want to be happy, but other people's happiness that's their business. That's the kind of orthodox position that most people have. But by changing that, it can be beneficial. The normal attitude is that people have to think that it doesn't matter if other beings are not happy. It doesn't matter if others are suffering. But it is important that oneself is happy and free from suffering. One normally considers oneself first, regarding oneself as more important than others. And through this sending and taking on practice, it's possible to change the attitude that one is able to take the suffering of others. Some new to the practice, he says, get worried because they think by doing the practice they will have to lose happiness and experience suffering, which makes them fearful. However, there is no need for anxiety because whatever happens to oneself is solely a result of one's karma. Doing this practice does not bring suffering. Other people do the practice with great expectations, with great hope. They think of a friend who is ill, unhappy, or otherwise suffering, and they visualize this friend doing the meditation in the hope that they will remove the suffering. And when they find it doesn't work, they lose hope and become disillusioned. This is not what the practice is about. The point is to cherish other beings as important rather than regarding oneself as important. So there is no need to have worries of fear or expectation. However, it is not true to say there is no result from the practice. In the immediate present, one is not able to bring happiness or remove suffering, but by doing the practice, one will gradually cease to cherish oneself over others. Instead, one will develop the wish to practice in order to benefit all beings, and eventually leading to helping the beings and introduce them to the Dharma. To be able to give them happiness and relieve them from suffering and from whatever qualities one have, This is called relative bodhicitta. The ultimate bodhicitta is approached by pacifying concepts and dualism. All thoughts are calmed. One clinging to dualism, one rests in meditation, one dissolves to emptiness. That is bodhicitta. So I do this, I've done this daily for the past 30 years. And just 5 minutes a day. It has a cumulative benefit. It doesn't, you don't have to, it's better if you can get it into a routine so that, like cleaning your teeth is something you do. And I've not really met anyone that doesn't have 5 minutes spare in a day, however busy they are. And that's quite interesting because when you do this practice, it really helps you think of others in a more positive way. And the thing which gets us into trouble is our own negative karma. And doing this practice is a very good way of accumulating positive karma, because you're doing something for the benefit of others. So you may say, well, okay, I can understand that to help myself. I can understand that to help my friends and families. But why should I help horrible people? People who are difficult, awkward, nasty. They're the people you should concentrate on, because from their negativity, they will allow you to shed more of your ego. I mean, this is not a new idea. Before Buddha, there were many traditions in China where the saying is, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. And but from a Buddhist point of view, we're doing it from a positive motivation point of view, not a negative one. So there is a kind of text, this text I put on the website, and those of you who have interest in this, following it up, go to the website and see the detailed instructions, various lists and web lists and books and things. But my next book comes out in April, nothing to do with Buddhism, and the publisher said, well, it's going to be on Audible as well. And I said, why? I said, well, young people don't read anymore. And so there's different multimedia opportunities, YouTube links and things to look at and hear it directly from people who know more about this thing than I do. And I find it really, really practical. And I've mentioned this before, but when I used to live here for 21 years as a non-immigrant resident alien, retired, I had the dubious honor of going to the immigration once a year to give them answers to questions they already knew, which took several hours, and it's 30 kilometers away from where I lived. It wasn't something I particularly looked forward to, until one day I thought, well, let's try a Tong Leng on this. So you go to the immigration office out near Dong Muan Airport, and it's a massive building, and it's got Department of Immigration in big letters in English and Thai. And so I look at the letters and I change the letters to something else. I change them to the Palace of Patience. This is where I'm going to learn patience. And it's not so much the individual Thai immigration officers are nasty, it's just the system is not terribly user-friendly. And so they have to deal with the system as other people do. And then I began to realize that I don't have to do this once a year. These guys are here every day of the week. So I began to see things from their perspective more. And in the end, I actually made friends with a couple of immigration officers. And I didn't mind going there at all. It was just something you do. So this brings to an important point that in Buddhism, according to my teachers, the important thing is not what happens in your life, because unpleasant things will happen in all of us' life from time to time. It's inevitable. The important thing is how you deal with it. And by accepting it and trying to work with it, it's much more positive than being sorry for oneself. My elder brother had a difficult year 3 years ago. His wife died. He got bowel cancer, and it was not a good time. You know, it was not a good time at all. And so I introduced him to Tong Leng. He's nothing to do with, you know, he's not Buddhist at all in any way, shape or form. But I said, this will not cure your cancer. But what it will do is let you deal with this so that you are a cancer. You're not suffering cancer. You're not a victim. And you can work with whatever it is you're dealing with. And those who may know, bowel cancer is a particularly nasty form of cancer because you have to have a stoma where your physical waste comes out of your stomach into a bag. You know, it's very unpleasant and nasty and not something you wouldn't wish on anybody. And even people, I have done some work with people who work in hospices, and the people who suffer chronic pain, they can examine their pain, and if they do that, they often see that pain is very rarely at full throttle 24/7. It comes in cycles, in waves. And so by doing this kind of practice, what you can do is lengthen the period between the peaks of the pain. And knowing that, you get to find out that nothing lasts. Even pain doesn't last permanently. Everything is impermanent. And so you have to deal with what you have to deal with, knowing you will get respite from time to time, and you can develop ways of extending the tranquility between the waves of discomfort. So shall we try a Tong Leng where you recall your either a special friend or family members, someone that you know and love very well. They could be dead, it doesn't matter, but if they're alive, so much more useful. And when you do so, think of the difficulties that your friends have had in their life. So let's try that, shall we? So we get comfortable and relaxed. We bring to mind those we love and respect. And we think of difficulties they have, either physical or mental. And visualize that, these difficulties in a ball of hot black smoke outside your own body. And you inhale it. And as it comes into your body, it has a direct attack on your ego. And the ego shell slowly cracks. And as it cracks, white light of your Buddha nature radiates loving kindness to all around. So do this 1 or 2 times. When I was first introduced to this technique 30 years ago, so the, of course,
You said something.
we'll get a microphone. Can you just hold a minute?
Thank you. Hello. Yes, I have a question
Okay.
about the ego. You said that we need to destroy it, and I wanted to clarify with you, what do you mean by that? Because in Tibetan Buddhism, Trungpa Rinpoche is my root guru actually, and my dear teacher. We say that our ego is inherently empty of existence. So what is there to destroy if it's empty in nature? So maybe the wording, I would say, is the self-cherishing and the grasping to the ego that we have, and the grasping to the comfort versus pain, for instance, happiness versus suffering. And through Tong Leng, that grasping loosens
Right.
and self-liberates, I would say. Because destroying implies something violent in nature. And in a way, if we do that, our ego will rebel. And,
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point. The difficulty in explaining experiences with words are profound. And Vajrayana Buddhism also says the ego doesn't exist at all, in one way. What we're trying to do with this, there's more than one way to explain Tong Leng. And with this particular way, the idea is that we're trying to communicate the possibility that our Buddha nature, which we all have, can be accessed. And one of the impediments to that are grasping, as you said, and other negative things. And this is a way of dealing with that situation. I think someone who has been doing Tong Leng practice all his life is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I've had the great fortune to have a couple of one-on-one meetings with him. And it brings to mind some remarks by an American poet, by, I think her name, Maya Angelou. And she rightly says that it's not what people have done in their life or what they say when they speak that's important. Those two are not that important. But what is really important is when you're in the presence of someone in the same room, how do they make you feel? And I would challenge anybody who's ever met His Holiness the Dalai Lama that it's quite something. I was involved in creating an international architectural competition to create a fund, create a retreat centre on an island in Scotland. It was quite an expensive process. So to raise awareness, we decided to run an international architectural competition using the Royal Incorporation of Scottish Architects. And it's quite a money-making thing, because in Scotland, if you want to enter an architectural competition, you've got to put down £2,000, non-returnable. And so we got 700 architects from around the world to do this. And it was very successful, and the buildings built, etc., etc. So I was staying in this monastery as a guest in this monastery in Scotland. And the abbot of the monastery, Akon Rinpoche, said to me one day, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., His Holiness the Dalai Lama wants to see you. I felt like I was back at school again, and the headmaster was about to call me in his office. So I went along, and it was just me, him, his bodyguard, and his minder. And he gets hold of my hand. He said, "Are you Andy?" I said, "Oh, yes. Oh, I've been wanting to meet you." I said, what do you mean? He said, "I have a question for you. This architectural competition, where 700 architects applied to win the competition, only one architect was successful." I said, "That's right." He said, "What's Buddhist about that? Aren't we creating misery and suffering for 699 architects?" He said it in a kind of joking but serious way, if you know what I mean. And we talked about one or two things. It's the basic guy, so he left. Then a very remarkable thing happened. After he left the room, his attendant came up to me and he said, "Have you seen your face?" I said, "What do you mean?" And then I touched my face, and I've been crying a lot. My face was totally wet with tears. I was a bit embarrassed. And he said, "No, it's okay." I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, when you're in the presence of someone with such spiritual purity in close proximity, he has the capacity to transform some of your negativity in the medium of tears." He said, "Not all your negativity, but some of it." And that was quite remarkable. And he, in one of his books, he says that one of the things that he does every single day is Tong Leng. And because it helps him understand the nature of humanity in more detail.
So what happened to the money?
Well, the money is quite a long story, but I'll try and give it briefly. I should start from the beginning, I suppose. I was in this monastery in Scotland, and the abbot comes to me and said, "Andy, I've had a dream, and there's this island. We have to buy this island. It's in the Atlantic." I said, "But you've got an overdraft. How's this going to work?" He said, "Well, come with me to the island." So I said, "Okay." So it was difficult to get to the island. It wasn't a long way geographically, but, you know, train, 3 ferries and a boat sort of thing. And there was a very rich Irish lady who owned this island. It was a small island, maybe 10 kilometers long, 1,000-meter mountain in the middle of it. And her husband had died, and so she didn't want to leave on the island by herself. But I did due diligence on this lady before I met her, and I found that she's quite well off. She has an estate in Scotland, one in Ireland, etc., etc. And she was a Catholic, as it happened. And I said, "Why do you want to sell this to Buddhists?" He said, "Well," she said, "Catholics would turn into a Catholic rock, but I think Buddhists would make it more open to anyone who wanted to go." Okay, and this is about 35 years ago, and the real estate people said it was £1 million. It's 35 years ago. And she was about 85, I think. And I was much younger then, obviously. And I said, "Well, why don't you just give it us? I mean, what would you do with £1 million? You're 85. You've got 2 estates. Your children are looked after." And she was quite shocked. And eventually she agreed to sell it for $500,000. And then the problem was that in Scotland, I didn't realise that the law in Scotland is much stricter than England on property. And if you agree to buy somewhere, you've got to buy it by a due date. And if you don't, the police come round and sell your assets. And so I then found a millionaire who gave us an industry loan, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so we got persuaded the Dalai Lama to be the patron of the project. And because of that, the money started coming in, no problem. The competition was needed because the local authority were Plymouth Brethren, which basically is the Genghis Khan of Christianity. And there's no way devil worshippers are going to be in our property. So they changed the law, to say it retrospectively. And they found some rare bird on this island. And they said that you can't build anything there because blah, blah, blah. And anyway, so eventually I met some friends of mine in Edinburgh and they said, why don't you run an international competition and just really embarrass these people big time? And went back to the Dalai Lama, he agreed to be the patron, blah, blah, blah. And it was done in a blind thing so that we didn't know who designed what. And so all the solutions came in, and then the judges said, it's this one. And they pulled back, and the winner is some 22-year-old students in Amsterdam who'd never built anything. It was a wonderful design, but then the structural engineers came on board and said, you know, their plan is to blow a big hole in a granite mountain. Just how much money do you people have? And the prize was £25,000 or something. But to a 22-year-old 30 years ago, a lot of money. And so I had to go to Amsterdam. The good news is you've got a check. The bad news is we're not going to build it. We can't afford it. Then there was a difficult, quiet period. Then I got a phone call from someone called Richard Rogers, who was a British architect who designed the Pompidou Centre in Paris, the Lloyd's Stock Exchange in London, and a couple of airports. He was a famous guy. And he rang up and said, I hear you're having problems. Oh, no, we're not really. I said, yes, you are. You've got a problem. Why don't you re-look at my plan? I said, you weren't even shortlisted. And why should I look at it? And he said, well, I'm chair of the European Union Ecological Architecture Commission. I said, so? I have a budget of €1 million. Oh, when can we have lunch? So his solution was introduced. So that's how I met. It's a long story. Sorry about that. How are we doing for time? Not very well. If there are any general questions about meditation, I've got this here. It's not AI, but there are lots of answers to things you might want to know. And like, for example, how do I avoid falling asleep when I'm trying to meditate? How do I deal with physical pain? How do I stop trying too hard? And how do I overcome torrents of thoughts that disturb my meditation? These are not my answers. These are answers that I've accumulated by various teachers that I've recorded here. And I'm just throwing this out there if there's anything you want. How are we doing for time?
We still have 3 minutes.
Okay.
Open for questions?
Yeah, sure.
Any questions?
Question. Can you please clarify, like, how, when you visualize, like, all the pain you encounter in your life into a black hole and you inhale it in the meditation, how does it help you dissolve the ego? And so I kind of had a hard time, like, visualizing that. And how does it help the inner light come out and to break that ego that you just mentioned? Like, is there a way to explain it a little bit better for us to understand and to visualize so we can practice this meditation?
Yes and no. When I was first introduced to this, Trungpa Rinpoche said at the end of his talk about Tong Leng, there will be no questions. And people said, what do you mean? I said, well, any question that I'm not attacking you personally, it's a general thing. Any question that you hear from the first time you understand Tong Leng would not be that useful. He said, do it for 3 years and then we can talk. But basically what I'm saying is you've got to do it first and then find out what the obstacles are. Sometimes some people say, well, that's okay, but I can't visualize. And that's just not me. I would disagree with that because most of us who maybe have the good fortune to think about some nice event that's going to happen, maybe you're going to get married, maybe you go on vacation, maybe see some friends you've not seen for a while, you can imagine what that is, even though it's not actually present. But your question is more to the point, and I'm not disrespecting it. I'm just saying you have to do it and then find out. And there are lists on the document I produced for the website with links, and particularly go to the YouTube videos where it's dissected in great detail, the 3 40-minute videos, which, not by me, but by more skillful people than me, which break it down. Do you see what I mean? I don't want to... It's a good question, but I can't answer that right now. You have to experiment with it, find out more information, and then take it from there. Sorry about that, I'm not giving you a good answer.
So, more of sharing, and with the question in the end, is the way I visualize it when we were visualizing the other person that we love and cherish.
Yes.
And taking their pain away, which feels like the mother kind of a feeling that we want to protect the person, so we take their pain away. But then it kind of doesn't work with breaking our own ego, because we believe in a system that we can actually help, and the only help is by giving love and kindness.
Yes.
So in this sense, it's the stream of breaking the ego.
Right. I mean, the idea is that the more difficult emotions, negative emotions, you can think about in your case with your friends and family, the more likely it is to shatter egoistic feelings and enable you to release white light of loving kindness. Yes.
Just to clarify the actual process.
Yes.
I've not heard of this at all.
Okay.
Complete fresh.
That's fine.
So just a very practical process. You have visualizing dark negative energy or something, a cloud, and then you literally breathe that in within your body.
Yes.
And then wherever there's a ego or whatever, I don't know to what extent you have to visualize that, but this will burst, and then there's white light. Do you release it, or do you keep it in your body? Do you breathe that out?
Yes. So another good question. The first thing is that this doesn't really work unless the entity which you are breathing in is really unpleasant, something you really don't want to do. So in Bangkok, when they used to have these really old buses, and if you were on a motorbike right behind it's that kind of thing. That's breathing this wonderful carbon monoxide. You know, that's the kind of routine you get into. And then when you breathe this negative black acrid smoke in, we're doing it so we can exchange something positive. And normally, the thing which makes us reluctant to be magnanimous and generous is our ego. You know, I'm okay, why should I help somebody else? So we've got to get rid of this blockage before we release our latent Buddha nature. It's different in Vajrayana Buddhism because it is really, to put simply, in Vajrayana Buddhism, you start at the end, not the beginning. In other words, you accept the idea that we are already Buddhas. And the reason why we're not acting as a Buddha is because of our negativity, our accumulated negative karma. And one of the benefits for ourselves as we do this practice, it accumulates more positive karma as we do it. It can change one's behavior in a sense, so that whether you are going in the subway, going through security, and you smile or you why at the person at the gate, acknowledging that they're not just a person in a uniform, they are a person. And it will generate more positive behavior. Is that getting anywhere near your question?
Yeah, that does. It's just the light that's released is just whatever it is. You're not creating that. You're not like putting an imagination to what that white light should be. It just counters, right? And when you release that out.
Yeah, it's often compared to moonlight, and most of us have seen moonlight at some point. And I'm lucky. I used to live in Finland at one time and used to see the aurora borealis almost every day in winter, and that was just incredible to see that in that situation.
I find what you're saying somewhat counterintuitive, but I think it may be have real value. I find in my own meditation, I'm quite adept at pinpointing all the essential delights I should say no to, but I'm also very keen to sort of reject all the anxieties, etc., that are in my life. So is this, am I on the same sort of page as you're talking about?
Not really. When we have anxieties, to use this practice, we say, bring it on. Is this all you got? And then we transform it into something else. Okay?
But isn't that counterintuitive? I mean,
Yes, it is.
Those people don't say, oh, I really want to feel terrible today.
Well, it is counterintuitive, but that's one of the reasons why it works.
Yeah.
There is another kind of example which might explain things. I don't know, let's see. I supervised somebody's, I think they're in Portland, Oregon. She was doing a PhD, and what she wanted to know was, why is it that certain people not only climb Everest, but climb all the 8,000-meter mountains 3 times? And there's just 18 people in the world that have done this. To climb Everest once, you kind of get it, but 3 times, and plus, what the hell is going on? And so I use some research method called induction, where the researcher has a conversation with these mountaineers, one-on-one, several conversations. There's no questionnaire, there's no list of questions. You just ask them, what's up? And they tell you their particular situation until the pattern comes out. There's always a pattern. And in this instance, the pattern, why are they doing this? And when they said, well, aren't you frightened? Isn't it, K2 apparently is more dangerous than Everest. And these mountains, they're all very dangerous, potentially. So how do you deal with that? And what they do is they transform their fear into exhilaration. And it became even more interesting because then a clinician in a hospital in San Francisco who was dealing with pregnant women, there's a technical term for that, I've just gone out of my head for the moment, whatever that is. And it's difficult for me with some man, but if you're a woman and you've never given birth yet, and suddenly you've got a child inside you, that must be quite a scary situation, I think. And so this realization that fear can be turned into exhilaration formed part of a training program for midwives. Because, I mean, what is more wonderful than giving birth to a child? I mean, it is without parallel. I mean, well, it's something that I can't imagine because I'm a man. But to give birth to a child, wow, okay, it's rough. It's not going to be too pleasant, but big picture time, you know? So it's about transferring things. We've got one question. We'll have to be the final one. We're going to get kicked out in 5 minutes.
I wasn't really sure if I was going to ask this because it's
Okay.
bringing in another factor, but
All right.
in regards to the ego and smashing the ego and bringing that white light and how that relates with a classic psychology concept in heuristic, in NLP, which is whereby you just, it's nothing to do with ego or white light, but it works by the psychology whereby you just imagine dark stuff in one hand and light stuff in another, and you smash the dark stuff with the light stuff. You reduce it to a little ball, and then you smash it, and you just repeat that. It's just like a psychological destruction of light destroying darkness. How does that relate with this one whereby you're using ego, your inner self, white light release?
Well, the process is similar, but there's a missing element, I think. You can't do this if you don't have the appropriate motivation. So one's doing it for the benefit of others. And it's done on the belief that all of us want to be happy, and some of us are more successful at it than others. And so in order to do that, one has to understand that we're all part of the same community, even though we don't look to be like that. So I'm not a psychologist, but the problem with psychology is that it's bound by all kinds of preconceptions, which is okay, but it doesn't really add to the situation. Where the useful example is that you are transforming negative to positive, and in that it's the same. But it's the reason why you're doing it that's very important from a Buddhist point of view. Are we out of time? Or no?
I think probably, is anybody else have another question? You might be available to talk to people afterwards, so
sure.
if you'd like to talk to Dr. Lowe afterwards, please do so. I think we're entering a really interesting era now. We're getting a diverse, as you said, this is an eclectic group, no longer rooted in Theravada Buddhism exclusively. This week we heard from you talking about Vajrayana Buddhism, and next week we're going to hear from Josiah Achi. He's going to talk to us about koans and Zen Buddhism.
All right, good.
So this kind of is a nice blend, and then the following week we're going to get Dharma Circle and people consider on and talk about Buddhism, and then we're going to swing back to Theravada Buddhism with Prabhupada did, I think. Is that right? Yeah. So it's kind of you move here, you move there. So if you've got Mondays free, think about Bonnery. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I say a few words about what we're going to be doing next week?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm Joe, and so we're going to be discussing Zen koans. How many of you are familiar with Zen koans? Anyone? Not too much. Okay, well, basically,
One hand clapping. One hand clapping.
yeah, well, that's the one that's often used as a joke. But Zen koans are like questions
2 months' time.
Okay, fine. Singapore I can live with. Bora Bora seems like a dream I've never had. We would ask people to help us a little bit cleaning up. The brown chairs go in this room, and Mr. Best will help you arrange it. The white chairs go in that room, and we also have a box outside. We have changed modus operandi a little bit. Now it will only be for either the speaker or for the organization that funds this, and because basically we use our money to pay for taxes, etc. So we leave that up to the speakers to decide, but so that box is for this organization. And the last thing, I guess, is you wish to make an announcement?
Oh, yeah, well, for those of you who are new, some of us will go to a nearby restaurant or cafe. Everyone is welcome to join and continue the conversation. Okay.
I'm not taking the donations. Anything put in the speaker's box goes to Little Bangkok Sangha.
Yeah.
Okay.